We definitely didn't want to stay in the comfort zone, and because I feel like real emotions are made.
Yeah.
You know, we all remember the first kiss. We all remember the first breakup or our first death or whatever, because it breaks out of the comfort zone. So to do that in cinema, you got to go for it.
First podcast, calzone.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that. Hi, my name is Jason Gay. I'm with the Wall Street Journal, and this is a fledgling video podcast. Last week, we had our first guest, Emma Stone. This week, the acclaimed filmmaker Darren Aronofsky has joined us.
Thank you.
Director of Mother in theaters everywhere currently. But before we get going on the film, Darren, are you hungry? We had a little bit of a controversy last week. Emma Stone came in, was very lovely, but hungry. And I thought she was doing a gag, but listeners or viewers watched this and were furious with me for not feeding. So we got hoagies here. I don't know what these are. Hot wings, maybe?
Yeah.
Calzone from Little Italy.
I already had a bite.
Okay. You don't have to eat all this by the end of the podcast, although that would be kind of great.
No.
And if it starts to smell, let me know.
Okay.
Big few weeks for you, buddy.
Yep.
It's been pretty amazing to watch the ride of this film. I got an opportunity to speak to you over the summer before it came out. You knew this film was going to get people talking, and not just talking. They were going to be arguing. It was going to be a film that was going to start a conversation. You weren't shy about that. You called it a roller coaster. You said people had trouble looking you in the eye after they saw it. Is the reaction in line with what you expected going in?
You say it and you think it, but deep down inside you want everyone to love it like they love Black Swan. But yeah, I knew it. We always talked about it. We knew what the type of film was. It was very much a punk movie. It was very aggressive. Yeah. It was, attacking the audience, and it was one of those types of films we wanted to make. And so, it's exciting that people are out there talking about it, fighting over it, debating it, writing essays on it. That's in its own way exciting and flattering, I guess. But that's the you want to get. It's very hard to get people to have any reaction in today's circus that we live in.
Right.
Sure. Because every couple of days a new insane thing happens in the news. So
sometimes hourly.
Yeah, sometimes hourly. So it was. We wanted to break through and do something different.
You've said also that this is the kind of film that you yourself enjoyed going to as a moviegoer, the kind of film that, in and of itself was starting a conversation, was the kind of film that would linger with you, not just in the 20 minutes after you leave the theater, but sometimes weeks, months, sometimes even years.
Well, that's been the cool thing is 3 days after, a week after, getting a text or an email from someone who saw it a week before and was like, we're still talking about it.
Yeah.
Every dinner, it's all we talk about. And that's cool because you want to make films that aren't disposable like the rappers on these things, but are memorable. So I grew up, sneaking into the Greenwich Village to see Clockwork Orange and Stop Making Sense and all the cult films of that Liquid Sky.
Sure.
And those were definitely films. When Pi played Midnight in Greenwich Village, it was kind of this incredible night for me. And so I think that my tastes have always leaned that way.
A lot of folks have said that Mother is the kind of film that you really don't see a studio make nowadays, that, for a variety of factors, it's not the kind of film that Hollywood puts out in wide release anymore. Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I'm not sure what drove what, the studios or the audiences, but I don't know. It's also radically changing now with this golden era of television happening now, where, you're seeing these incredible dramatic characters brought to life, but only on TV.
Yeah.
You're not really seeing that in the cinema anymore. And I don't know the source of why. It may be that it's so expensive to release a movie that you kind of have to capture as many people as you can.
Yeah.
And so films have just moved more and more towards that. I call it the vanilla factor. If you have 20 people in the room who have to decide on an ice cream flavor, they're going to come to vanilla, and that's, they sometimes it's really good vanilla and it's great, but there's very little room in the marketplace for films that are outside of the box.
I should say that we want to do this podcast a little bit funny. We're going to break it in half. The first half, we're going to talk about the film in sort of a way for people who haven't seen it, and by all means, you need to see it. I'm not just saying that as someone who saw it once, but twice. And then the second half, we're going to talk about it in such a way for people who have seen the film and might have questions about it. So, spoiler
And the
alert.
second time, how did it feel?
I was surprised because I'm somebody who doesn't see films multiple times. I mean, I have a kind of small queue of films that I will watch if they come on cable, but I'm not a repeat viewer.
I'd like to hear that list.
It begins and ends with Slapshot.
Mine's Rudy.
Why are these sports movies? I'm so male. But the other part of it was I took my wife, who had not seen it, and I was so excited to see what her reaction was to it. I mean, she found it completely thrilling, and we talked about it for not just hours, but days afterwards, still talking about it. I think that's part. I mean, the roller coaster analogy is kind of perfect because I do feel like people had, a visceral reaction to this. This was not simply something that's being intellectually processed. People were sweating.
Yeah, my friend Jesse, who I grew up with in South Brooklyn, and is like a dude. Just like he was like, it got under my skin, and I could feel it, and I didn't know what was happening to my body, and it was a very strange reaction to get from him. But I was like, that's exciting when you get people and you capture them with an emotion they haven't had before, and I think we definitely didn't want to stay in the comfort zone, and because I feel like real emotions are made.
Yeah,
we all remember the first kiss, we all remember the first breakup or our first death or whatever, because it breaks out of the comfort zone. So to do that in cinema, you got to go for it.
First podcast, calzone.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that.
Exactly.
What's an example of a reaction that surprised you? It doesn't have to be negative, could be a positive reaction, just coming from a source somewhere out there that, reacted in a way that you didn't anticipate.
It was strange. 2 different female choreographers saw it and had the same reaction, and they didn't know each other.
Okay.
Which was they interpreted the kind. And can we do a spoiler?
Sure. Spoiler. We're going to flash it on the screen, but yes.
They interpreted the baby as like a piece of art that someone creates and then gives to an audience, and then the audience does what they do with it. They devour it. They take it. They celebrate it. That was never an intention as a writer, which is cool because I think we want things to be open and loose enough as long as they're pointing in the right direction.
Yeah.
The only reactions that upset me are people who just thinks it's dark or violent for that reason.
Yeah.
And it couldn't be further from the truth. We lean into the darkness to reveal the light. The same thing we did in Requiem for a Dream was we had to go all the way to that darkness to reveal what addiction does to people. That's what Hubert Selby Jr., the author, talked about and was trying to do with his book, and that was the whole purpose. When the MPAA said you can't get a rated R rating unless you trim it, the studio at the time backed me because they felt, they probably not for the right reasons, but for me it was once you started to remove the darkness, you're taking away from what the point of it is. And this film was very much about taking a look at what life on the planet is like in 2017. It's funny that the scene with the baby was very much inspired by this thing that went viral on the internet, which was this footage of these tourists down in South America that found a beached baby dolphin and started taking selfies with it and ended up killing it. Mm-hmm. And then it happened the second time. And that was all right when I was writing this, was seeing stuff like that going on in the world.
This was written rather impulsively. I think sort of almost like in a fever dream, like over a period of 5 days to a week, something like that. But obviously, it's a different thing to write it and then put it together as a film. And, you have a lot of time to consider what you're doing. You're not sort of impulsively making a major feature film. Yeah. And tell me about sort of like that, you point about like, violence or shock and like the idea of provocation. There's so much just provocation for provocation's sake in the culture nowadays. We're almost inured to it.
Yeah.
But you're not doing that here.
No. I mean, it's a pet peeve. I don't like the way violence is kind of not treated honestly
Yeah.
on screen, and it's something we see almost everywhere. So, I've always wanted to represent violence realistically, which I think this film does. Doesn't glamorize it; it just shows you how scary it is.
It's interesting you just mentioned horror for a minute, because I know people have referred to this offhandedly as a horror type film. My wife, I could not drag her in any circumstance to a horror film. Doesn't at all sort of see this, there are elements, of course, of, great horror films and stuff like that, but it's not by any means a genre picture.
Yeah, I'm not very good at sort of landing in one genre. It's like, Pi wasn't quite an independent or a sci-fi film, and Requiem for a Dream wasn't really kind of just a drug film, and The Fountain, who knows what that was.
Wrestler's not a sports movie.
Yeah, well, that was a big loss for me, was when ESPN did their sports awards. They refused to put us in their category to win that trophy, which I was very upset because I wanted that trophy. They wouldn't even nominate us.
Yeah,
they were like, it's
that.
not a sports movie. I'm like, what are you talking about? Yeah, it's a sports movie.
Nobody watches ESPN, don't worry.
So I don't really quite fall into the genre thing, but I like to use genre elements to sort of, because audiences appreciate them. They sort of know where things are going to go. They like to jump. They like to be scared. So there are a lot of jump scares in the film.
Yeah.
But it's definitely, I don't think it really fits into a genre that it was easily sold to people. It's not really a psychological thriller. It's a weird one.
There's an unusual technique in it. I don't know if it's unusual, but it's very noticeable that I think something like 2/3 of the film is shot over Jennifer Lawrence's shoulder. I mean, you're seeing it from her view.
Yeah, there's only 3 shots in the film. It's either the camera over her shoulder, a close-up on her face, or what she's looking at, her POV. That's it. There's no wide shots. There's no inserts. There's no coverage that you would normally do of the other actors. Everything's from Jen's direction and point of view. And the idea was to take the audience and stick them fully into the mind of Mother, the main character of the film that Jen plays, and to give a full subjective experience of that. So all the sound design is all coming out of her head and all of what she hears. And that's probably why we weren't able to use music. We worked on music for the film, but what I realized is music is actually like the director saying, I want you to feel this way.
Yeah.
And what I wanted the audience to be doing is leaning in to try and figure out what Jennifer was feeling.
Yeah.
And because she's such a great tour guide on this film, she never lets up. I think that's why the film works. Is you're constantly like trying to see how she's taking in all this crazy stuff that's happening to her. Okay,
now I want to cut here, and this is going to be the part where we're going to talk about the film for people who have seen it, or maybe you're a sadist who just wants to, hear about us talk about it before you've seen it. But by all means, go see Mother.
I don't know if it can be ruined by spoilers, because it's still, even if it's spoiled for you, it's still how it gets there is going to screw you up.
I agree with that 100%. But as someone who talked about this with you in the film, there was a layer of secrecy about this film going in. You guys were very protective.
I think we're always trying to be protective just because information flows out really quickly. And so
misinterpretation and that kind of thing?
No, not that. I mean, just people without interpretation, sort of the things that go on in the film, which are super intense, can be taken out of context. And in fact, the thing that is on paper the most shocking thing about the film is generally not the most shocking thing in the movie for people.
I think that's true.
Yeah.
Okay. Is this film a Rorschach, or is there a single interpretation in your view?
I mean, there's clearly not a single interpretation.
Right.
For me, I always saw 3 streams forming and braiding together into a river. It was always 3 ideas that lined up emotionally in the same way, but all led to the same basin, which I was hoping would make. I was hoping that people would spend time thinking about what it means and decoding it and trying to figure out what the different things represent and symbolize. If I wanted to be completely obvious, it would have been very easy to give the characters names or to really sell it. But I think it was always about knowing some people are going to go see the movie and just feel the emotional story between this kind of selfish creator, narcissistic guy with a caregiver played by Jen, and their marriage starting to fall apart and the horror of that.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have just seen that,
Right.
you know. And then there's a larger allegory that we've talked a little bit about, you know, sort of capturing the spirit of Mother Nature, and that's another one. So, and then there's this kind of biblical structure through it.
Right.
And so, you know, it's a pretzel. You could eat it from many different ways. It's still delicious.
I mean, some people have quite literally taken Javier's character to be you. I mean, said that this is, you know, autobiographical.
Yeah, I don't know. I think every single character I'm connected to that I've ever made. I was not the ballerina. I'm not a ballerina, but I was the ballerina. I'm not a math whiz, but I was the guy drilling into his skull. I was never a drug addict, but I understood what it meant to be an addict. And I think you kind of have to connect with all these characters, you know, and I think I connect more with Jennifer Lawrence, the lead, than I do of Javier. I spent most of my time thinking from her point of view, and so when I was directing her and saying how you react to this or what she was saying, I would have to relate it through my own emotion. So I can see her choices and her decisions very clearly. And it's funny, some people are like, oh, you're definitely Jennifer. So,
That's interesting.
you know, but to be fair, there are parts of me that are the Javier. I think as a filmmaker, we get 2-3 months every 2-3 years when we are on set, and we have to become very, very selfish because it's like a 20-hour a day job, and it's you don't have time for your friends or your family, and so. But it's only every 2-3 months, every 2-3 years. So, you know, the rest of the time it's a 9-to-5 job. So I'm able to relate to that character of that, you know. But I don't think, you know, I was trying to make a full statement about myself.
Sure. Let's talk about the theological interpretation. And in particular, I'm curious about, because obviously with Noah, there were, you know, theologians who weighed in on that film, what the theological reaction has been to the film. Because I think you've shown it individually to people in the religious community about the film. Is that true or no?
No.
No, okay.
We did that a lot on Noah.
On Noah, okay.
Yeah.
But on this film, curious about the reaction on that.
I'm not really paying attention that much to that, to most stuff. I'm just sort of, the work's out there.
Yeah.
That's my job, is to make the work and then put it out into the world. But the reaction to it is interesting to me, but I'm not sort of focused that deeply on it. And I know there was certain, you know, there was all different types of responses to Noah. I was more aware of it then because it was so integral to what I was doing, because I was telling a Bible story,
Sure.
and I was trying to show tremendous respect for the story and trying to bring it to life for a 21st century audience. It bothered me that people were somehow, you know, not seeing that it was connected to the text, which it was very connected to the text, and was kind of in the tradition of interpretation. That's part of my tradition. But I on this one, I'm not sure what the reaction is, and I'm not sure because I think it just basically, you know, I think it shows respect to the stories, which is how I look at the Bible stories. I'm a storyteller, and those are the oldest stories in the world,
Sure.
and for some reason, they're stories that people keep telling, and that's because there's incredible symbolism and mythology in those creation myths, and how they relate to us is interesting because people have been telling them, you know, pretty much since the beginning of our time. Right. So I find that interesting.
And the interpretation of, you know, Scripture is, you know, a wildly diverse thing as well.
But I think that's the thing with any great story, is that it can be interpreted in lots of different ways. Booyah.
Booyah. It must be fascinating. I mean, it must be very strange to be in a world with a film for years, you know, not in isolation, but with a small crew. And this was a film that I believe you spent a good deal of time in rehearsal with the leads. And then you kind of let it go like this bird, and it's just flying around and just...
Yeah. You know, hopefully it won't get eaten too much by whatever eats birds. But I guess man.
Yeah, man.
You know, that's the thing with film, is it is letting a child run off. It is that time when they go to college or when they leave the house.
Now, Everybody wants to know what the yellow powder is in the film. That is a big topic of conversation. If you were the kind of person who lurked around the internet asking for what the interpretations of your film are, that is a big question, and there's a lot of diverging opinions as to what it is. So,
what are some of them? Do you know any of them? Do you remember?
I mean, I think that they are regarded as being sort of like life force and sun, I've read, being one of them. If your interpretation is that, Jennifer represents Mother Earth and that this film is about the torment of Mother Earth, that is sort of a life force of Earth. I don't know. Give us declaratively what it is.
There's certain mysteries that are better left mysterious.
Yeah. I didn't expect you to answer that one. Tell me just from a filmmaking standpoint about the third act of the film, and there's just this incredible rush of things that are happening in a very confined space, and it's very loud and it's very clamorous. Clamorous, loud, same thing. What that filmmaking experience was like, because you're not showing that from far back. You're right in the thick of what's happening.
Yeah. Well, technically, it was definitely the hardest sequence me and my team ever did. We kind of did in Requiem for a Dream. There's a scene where the old lady's house comes apart and the fridge comes alive and tries to eat her. That was about 2 minutes of insanity. In Black Swan, there was like a 2-3 minute sequence when she turns into the swan. This was a 25 to 30 minute sequence, which we called the fever dream. And it just meant every department working together in sync to sort of tell this harrowing story that as she's giving birth, moving through the kind of torments and of the world, as you will. And so, you just think about like hair, something, it has to go from scene to scene as it slowly becomes more and more unraveled and stuff. And so every beat of that is mapped out beforehand, with me and the hair designer, who's also working with the makeup designer, Judy Chin, who's watching as the makeup, changes as her makeup starts to smear and dirt starts to fall on her face and she gets hit with some blood. All these different things, she also gets her eye infected by the pepper spray.
Right.
And there's that. So all that stuff has to be tracked, and it works with everything, with the cinematography and the state of the house as it's slowly decaying. But it's great fun. It's awesome to take a character and have them move through, Dante's Inferno and be right over their shoulder and witness it with them.
Are you doing it sequentially, or are you doing it,
Yeah, it has to be completely sequential because the house was slowly decaying. So, every once in a while we'd put a wall back up, but most of the time as we ripped apart the house, we just would continue it. And so we would leave at night after a shot, and the designer and his art team would have like the night to sort of prep the next room and sort of fix anything that has to be done over again, but also get the next layer ready. But the house itself was this set that was built not like a normal Hollywood set, which is, if you throw your fist through the wall, you see daylight.
Yeah.
Everything had to built with lath and wires and plaster, and so that when everyone's ripping apart the house, it feels like a real house coming apart. So it was pretty complicated, but I like doing that stuff because it's fun when you start stitching it together. It's kind of like making all little beautiful beads together and stringing them on a string.
There are parts. There's a lot of pressure having you in the studio because when the lights go out, these guys.
Exactly.
There are elements of this third act, and that fever dream, and I don't think this is a spoiler, but feel very current. Feel like they are visuals of what has been happening in this world, both in terms of, refugee crises and, war that's happening. Is that, that those visuals feel very fresh and alive right now?
I mean, I talked a little bit about the baby dolphin.
Right.
So I think I was reacting to what was going on, which we all are, which is constantly being, inundated with these awful images and ideas of what's going on around the world. If you sit and read the Wall Street Journal from the beginning to the end and actually look past the words and actually think in the one photo that might be there and think what's really going on in those places, it's awful. I think it becomes more intense because we're with movie stars in a very, very immediate location witnessing this stuff.
Right.
But I tried to have everything reflect back to what's really going on.
So after you make a film like this, I mean, what do you need? You need a spa weekend now? Are you going to take some time away, or are you going to jump right into something else?
I'm definitely going to chill out for a bit. I think it's important. You do something. There's other stuff where my company's producing stuff. We have a really cool movie coming out maybe later this year called White Boy Rick.
Can you write while you're doing something else, or do you kind of have to start and stop?
I think it's pretty, when you decide to work on something, that's when you work. Right now, like, it's kind of a marathon. All the different projects are lined up at the starting line, or we're somewhere deeper into the marathon.
Yeah.
And the one that gets to the finish line the soonest is the one that is ready to start working on. And that's a weird thing. Like with Mother, there was the passion of that piece, and everyone got excited by it and was like, wow, this is going to be very, very different than anything you've done. Let's go for it. And it happened really quickly. Developing Black Swan and The Wrestler took many, many years.
Yeah. Another internet rumor about you is, not a rumor, but just like there's always this speculation, because at one point I believe there were conversations about you maybe getting involved in a comic franchise, like a Batman kind of film. Is that a possibility down the road? I think your fans are curious to see how you would interpret that.
Yeah, I've always been interested. I like those movies. I like the source material. It's just finding the right material at the right time that makes sense. I've been lucky that I've been able to, keep making these very, very, personal driven films. Yeah. Films that only I'd probably be interested in making them. Yeah. And so I've been happy to be on that path. And, but you never know.
What about Mother 2?
We'll see what happens with that.
Darren Aronofsky, sorry.
Yeah, I was just saying my films don't really sequel or prequel too well. If you think about The Wrestler, Black Swan, they all they kind of end, and then that's the end. Well, if you think of anything,
maybe
like
prequels.
Yeah, exactly.
Because Ram would have a fascinating prequel, right?
Definitely.
Ram on High.
Yeah.
Darren Aronofsky, thank you very much for joining us here on the WSJ Podvideocast. Sorry about all the disgusting food we made you smell for a half an hour, but folks,
fine.
If you have not seen Mother, by all means, go to see it. And go to see it with somebody that you can talk about, decompress, walk around the block. You have to, like I've read that Lin-Manuel Miranda has a 20-minute rule for going to see the theater, that his family, like, they won't talk about it for 20 minutes. I feel with your films, that's probably a good yardstick.
Very good. Yes.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.